What if I told you that the most powerful thing you can do in a world that constantly demands your reaction is to simply pause, to hold still, to let the storm pass through you without being swept away by it? Maybe you've already felt this. Maybe you have stood in the middle of a conversation that was turning heated, or read a message that made your chest tighten, or watched someone misunderstand you completely. And instead of leaping to defend yourself, instead of matching their energy with your own, you chose silence. Not the silence of weakness, not the silence of fear, but the silence of someone who knows that not every provocation deserves a response. And in that moment, something shifted. You felt it, a kind of steadiness, a kind of inner authority that had nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with presence. This is not about suppressing what you feel. It is not about pretending you are unaffected when you are not. It is about recognizing that between the stimulus and your response, there is a space. And in that space lives your freedom. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He spoke often about the inner world, about the process of individuation, about the long and often solitary journey of becoming who you truly are beneath all the roles and masks you wear. He knew that most people live reactively, pulled this way, and that by the currents of the outer world, by the opinions of others, by the need to be seen a certain way. And he knew that the path to wholeness required something different. It required a turning inward, a willingness to meet yourself in the quiet, to sit with what arises, to observe your own impulses without immediately acting on them. When you react quickly, when you let your emotions dictate your behavior in the moment, you hand over your power. You become predictable. You become controllable. Because anyone who knows how to push your buttons can steer you. They can provoke you into anger, into defensiveness, into justification. And once you are reacting, you're no longer acting from your center. You are acting from a place of agitation, from a place of imbalance. And in that state, you make decisions you later regret. You say things you do not mean. You engage in battles that do not serve you. You give your energy to people and situations that do not deserve it. But when you pause, when you allow yourself to feel the heat of the emotion without immediately expressing it, something remarkable happens. The emotion does not control you. You hold it. You contain it. And in that containment, you gain perspective. You see more clearly. You recognize that the person who just insulted you is likely speaking from their own pain. You understand that the situation that feels so urgent right now may not matter at all in a week. You realize that your need to be right, to be understood, to be validated, is not as important as your need to remain whole, to remain centered, to remain true to yourself. This is not easy, especially if you're someone who feels deeply. If you are someone who has spent your life attuned to the emotions of others, who has learned to read the room, who has developed a sensitivity that borders on the painful. You feel everything, the slight shift in tone, the unspoken judgment, the withdrawal of warmth. And because you feel it so acutely, your impulse is to respond, to fix, to explain, to bridge the gap. But what if the gap is not yours to bridge? What if the discomfort someone else feels in your presence is not your responsibility? What if their inability to understand you is not a problem you need to solve? Jung spoke about the persona, the mask we wear in the world, the version of ourselves we present to meet social expectations. And for many of us, especially those who are more introverted, more inwardly focused, the persona can feel like a burden. We learn early that our natural way of being is not always welcomed, that our need for solitude is seen as aloofness, that our depth is mistaken for heaviness, that our reluctance to engage in small talk is interpreted as arrogance. And so we adapt. We learn to smile when we do not feel like smiling. We learn to fill silence with words, even when the silence feels more honest. We learn to react in ways that make others comfortable, even when it exhausts us. But there comes a point, often in midlife, often after years of living this way, when something inside us says no. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, steady refusal to continue pretending. A recognition that the cost of maintaining the persona is too high, that we are losing ourselves in the effort to be acceptable. And this is where the real work begins. This is where we start to reclaim our energy, our time, our attention. This is where we start to understand that the less we react to the demands and judgments of the outer world, the more we are able to live from our inner truth. It is not that we become cold or indifferent. It is that we become discerning. We learn to distinguish between what truly matters and what is simply noise. We learn to recognize when someone is genuinely trying to connect with us and when they're simply projecting their own discomfort onto us. We learn that not every criticism requires a defense. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every invitation requires acceptance. And in this discernment, we find a kind of freedom that is hard to describe. It is the freedom of not being at the mercy of external circumstances. The freedom of knowing that your worth is not determined by how others perceive you. The freedom of being able to walk away from situations that do not serve your growth, your peace, your integrity. This does not mean you become passive. It does not mean you allow yourself to be mistreated or disrespected. It means you choose your battles wisely. It means you respond rather than react. And there is a profound difference between the two. A reaction is automatic, impulsive, driven by the immediate emotion. A response is considered, intentional, rooted in awareness. When you react, you are being controlled by the situation. When you respond, you are in control of yourself within the situation. And that shift, that movement from reaction to response, is where your power lies. Think about the last time someone said something that hurt you. Maybe it was a casual comment. Maybe it was a deliberate jab. In that moment, you felt something rise up inside you. Anger, perhaps, or sadness, or the urgent need to defend yourself, to explain, to make them see. And if you reacted immediately, if you fired back or withdrew in visible pain, you gave them information. You showed them exactly where you are vulnerable. You showed them that they have the power to affect you. And whether they intended to or not, they learned that they can push that button again. But what if instead, you had simply looked at them, felt the sting of their words, acknowledged it internally, and then chosen not to give them the satisfaction of a reaction? Not out of spite, not out of pride, but out of self-respect, out of a recognition that your inner state is more valuable than any external validation. What if you had simply said, in a calm voice, something neutral, or said nothing at all, and walked away, not in a huff, not with drama, just a quiet exit, a refusal to engage? In that moment, you would have retained your power. You would have shown, not through words but through presence, that you are not so easily moved, that you are not a puppet whose strings can be pulled at will. And more importantly, you would have protected your own peace. Because engaging in that moment, trying to make them understand, trying to win the argument, would have cost you something. It would have cost you your calm, your clarity, your energy. And for what? To prove a point, to be right, to be seen. But what cost? Jung understood that the process of individuation, of becoming truly yourself, requires a kind of withdrawal from collective thinking, from the constant need for external approval. It requires that you develop a relationship with your inner authority, with the voice inside you that knows what is true for you, regardless of what anyone else thinks. And this inner authority is not loud. It is not aggressive. It is quiet, steady, grounded. It does not need to shout because it is certain. And the more you listen to it, the less you are swayed by the noise outside. This is especially important for those of us who are more sensitive, more introspective. We are often told, directly or indirectly, that we are too much, too intense, too serious, too quiet. And we internalize these messages. We begin to believe that there is something wrong with us, that we need to change, to lighten up, to be more like everyone else. And so we try. We force ourselves into social situations that drain us. We laugh at jokes that are not funny. We engage in conversations that bore us. We react in ways that are expected, even when they do not feel authentic. And all the while, we are moving further and further away from ourselves. But what if there is nothing wrong with you? What if your depth is not a flaw, but a gift? What if your need for solitude is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of self-awareness? What if your reluctance to react impulsively is not coldness, but wisdom? What if the very things that make you feel different, that make you feel out of place, are actually the things that make you whole? When you stop reacting to every provocation, to every judgment, to every misunderstanding, you create space. Space for reflection, space for clarity, space for choice. And in that space, you begin to see patterns. You begin to see that the same situations keep arising, the same types of people keep triggering you, the same wounds keep getting poked. And instead of blaming the world, instead of feeling victimized by it, you start to ask different questions. Why does this bother me so much? What is this situation showing me about myself? What old wound is being activated? What part of me still needs healing? This is the inner work. This is the work that no one sees. The work that happens in the quiet moments, in the solitude, in the stillness. It is the work of becoming conscious, of bringing into awareness the patterns and beliefs and fears that have been running your life from the shadows. And it is not easy work. It requires honesty. It requires humility. It requires a willingness to sit with discomfort, to face parts of yourself that you would rather ignore. But this is where true control comes from. Not control over others, not control over external circumstances, but control over yourself, over your reactions, over your choices, over your inner state. And this kind of control is not rigid. It is not about suppression or denial. It is about mastery. It is about knowing yourself so well that you are no longer at the mercy of your impulses. You feel the anger, but you do not have to act on it. You feel the hurt, but you do not have to collapse into it. You feel the fear, but you do not have to let it dictate your decisions. There is a story Jung tells about a man who came to him, deeply troubled by his anger. He would explode at the smallest provocation, and it was destroying his relationships. Jung did not tell him to suppress his anger. He did not tell him to pretend it was not there. Instead, he helped him to see where the anger was coming from, to trace it back to its roots, to understand that it was not really about the present moment at all, but about old wounds, old betrayals, old feelings of powerlessness. And as the man began to understand this, as he began to see his anger not as an enemy, but as a messenger, something shifted. He no longer felt controlled by it. He could feel it arise, acknowledge it, and choose how to respond. This is the gift of awareness. This is what happens when you stop reacting and start observing. You begin to see that your emotions are not you. They are experiences you are having. They are signals, information, messengers from the unconscious. And when you treat them as such, when you listen to them without being ruled by them, you gain access to a deeper intelligence. An intelligence that knows what you truly need. That knows when to speak and when to stay silent. That knows when to engage and when to walk away. And the more you practice this, the more you cultivate this inner stillness, the more you will notice something interesting. The things that used to trigger you no longer have the same power. The people who used to push your buttons find that the buttons no longer work. Not because you have become hard or closed off, but because you have become whole. Because you have done the work of integrating your shadow, of healing your wounds, of reclaiming the parts of yourself that you had disowned. Jung spoke about the shadow, the parts of ourselves that we reject, that we push into the unconscious because they are too painful or too shameful or too inconvenient. And he said that what we do not bring into consciousness comes to us as fate, meaning that the parts of ourselves we refuse to face will keep showing up in our lives, projected onto other people, manifesting as recurring problems, until we finally turn and look at them, until we finally own them. And this is another reason why reactivity keeps us stuck. When we react, We are usually reacting to something in the other person that we have not yet accepted in ourselves. The person who irritates you with their arrogance may be reflecting back a part of you that wants to be seen, that wants to be acknowledged, but that you have learned to suppress. The person who triggers you with their neediness may be reflecting back your own unmet needs, your own longing for connection that you've been too afraid to express. And as long as you keep reacting, as long as you keep pointing the finger outward, you will never see what is really going on inside. But when you pause, when you create that space between stimulus and response, you give yourself the chance to look inward, to ask, what is this really about? What is being activated in me? What part of my shadow is being illuminated? And this is uncomfortable. This is why most people avoid it. It is easier to blame. It is easier to react. It is easier to stay on the surface. But if you are someone who has always felt different, who has always sensed that there is more to life than what meets the eye, then you already know that the easy path is not your path. Your path requires depth. It requires honesty. It requires a willingness to face yourself again and again in the mirror of your own experience. And here is the paradox. The more you turn inward, the more you withdraw your energy from the outer drama, the more powerful you become in the world. Not in a dominating way, not in a loud way, but in a way that is undeniable. People feel it. They may not understand it. They may even be unsettled by it, but they feel that you are not like everyone else, that you are not easily swayed, that you have a center, a gravity, a presence that is rare. This is because you are no longer leaking energy. You are no longer scattering yourself in 1,000 directions, trying to please everyone, trying to defend yourself, trying to be understood. You have gathered yourself. You have brought your energy back home. And from that place of inner coherence, you can engage with the world in a way that is authentic, that is intentional, that is aligned with who you truly are. But this does not mean the world will suddenly understand you. In fact, the more authentic you become, the more some people will misunderstand you. They will call you cold when you're simply boundaried. They will call you distant when you're simply discerning. They will call you arrogant when you're simply no longer performing for their approval. And this is where the real test comes. Because your old self, the self that still craves acceptance, will want to react, will want to explain, will want to prove that you're not what they think you are. But your true self, the self that has been emerging through all this inner work, knows better. It knows that their perception is their projection. It knows that you do not need to convince anyone of your worth. It knows that the people who are meant to understand you will, and the people who are not, will not, and that is okay. It knows that your peace is more important than their approval. And so you stay quiet. You stay steady. You let them think what they will. And you walk your path. This is the ultimate form of control. Not control over others, but sovereignty over yourself. The ability to remain centered no matter what is happening around you. The ability to choose your response rather than being hijacked by your reaction. The ability to protect your energy, your time, your inner world from the constant demands and distractions of the outer world. And it is a lifelong practice. There is no arrival point, no moment where you have it all figured out. There will still be times when you react, when you lose your center, when you say something you regret or engage in a battle that was not worth fighting. But each time, you learn. Each time, you see a little more clearly. Each time, you come back to yourself a little more quickly. And over time, the space between stimulus and response grows wider. The stillness inside you grows deeper. The clarity with which you see yourself and the world grows sharper. Jung called this process individuation. The lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are, distinct from the collective, distinct from the roles and expectations imposed upon you. And he was clear that this is not a path of perfection. It is a path of integration, of bringing together the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the persona and the true self. And it is a path that requires solitude. It requires time alone, time to reflect, time to feel, Time to listen to the quiet voice inside that is so easily drowned out by the noise of the world. If you're someone who has always needed more alone time than others, who has always felt restored by silence rather than drained by it, then you already understand this. You already know that solitude is not loneliness. That being alone is not the same as being empty. That in the quiet, you find something that you cannot find anywhere else. You find yourself, and the more you know yourself, the less you are controlled by the world outside, the less you need to react, the more you are able to respond from a place of wholeness. And this is not about becoming detached or indifferent. It is not about shutting down or closing off. It is about becoming so full inside, so grounded in your own being, that you are no longer desperate for external validation. You no longer need everyone to like you. You no longer need to win every argument. You no longer need to prove your worth. Because you know it. You feel it. And that knowing, that feeling, is not dependent on anyone else. This is the freedom that comes from non-reactivity. This is the control that comes from mastering yourself rather than trying to master the world. And it is available to you. It has always been available to you. It is simply a matter of practice, of pausing, of breathing, of creating space, of turning inward, of listening, of choosing, again and again and again. And as you do this, as you walk this path, you will find that life becomes simpler, not easier, necessarily, but simpler, because you are no longer carrying the weight of everyone else's opinions. You are no longer exhausting yourself trying to be understood by people who are not capable of understanding. You are no longer giving your power away to every person and situation that demands a reaction. You're keeping it. You're holding it. You are using it to build a life that is true to who you are. And maybe that life looks different from what you once imagined. Maybe it's quieter. Maybe it involves fewer people. Maybe it involves more time alone, more time in nature, more time in reflection. Maybe it does not look impressive from the outside. Maybe it does not come with applause or recognition, but it is yours. It is real. It is whole. And that is worth more than anything the world can offer. So if you're someone who has always felt a little out of step with the world, a little too deep, a little too sensitive, a little too much in your own head, know this. There is nothing wrong with you. Your way of being is not a defect. Your need for solitude is not a failure. Your reluctance to react impulsively is not coldness. It is wisdom. It is strength. It is the mark of someone who is doing the real work, the inner work, the work that no one sees, but that changes everything. And the less you react to the world outside, the more you are able to respond from the world inside, the world that is vast and rich and endlessly complex, the world that Jung spent his life exploring. The world that is your birthright, your home, your truth. Stay there. Return to it again and again. Let be your anchor. And from that place, you will find that you have more control than you ever imagined. Not over others, not over circumstances, but over yourself. And that is the only control that truly matters.